Ay, dude, I do not like doing this, but after we made our video just an hour and a bit ago, talking about the Vancouver Canucks and the Boston Bruins, we talked about Demko, we talked about Miller, we talked about Swayman. Ever since then, there have been a slew of extra Canucks news and rumors that we have to go out there and talk about it once again, because this is the kind of thing that gets everybody excited. Take a look at this tweet, published earlier this morning. This is by Anthony DeMarco. He does stuff for TSN. He was on the Brotherly Pod. He has done some pretty good work in the Philadelphia Flyers scene. And he tweeted this, that when it comes to the two teams that he hears are tied the most to Rasmus Ristolainen, they are the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Vancouver Canucks. Now, this kind of went sort of viral. It was published by Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts that Ristolainen's play has drawn attention, but the contract does make things complicated. Ristolainen is valued at about $3.5 million AAV. Philadelphia is willing to retain, but it will come at a cost. He's got 3 years left. Philadelphia is already retaining on Hayes until 2026, so tying up another retention spot long term isn't ideal. If the Flyers were to retain 25% plus on Ristolainen until 2027, I would expect a first-round pick as part of Philadelphia's price. With the cap going up, the contract will age well. Now, with Vancouver and Toronto being involved here, it opens the door up to a pretty interesting discussion as to whether or not you see Ristolainen as a potential Canucks suitable target. He's a big dude, 6'4", 220, right-handed defenseman, 29 years old, making this $5.1 million AAV till the end of 27. Now, if there is salary retained, that makes the dollar amount a little bit less, but for Ristolainen, he's had a really strange reputation the past few years. He's always been noted as a guy who's got some offensive flair, but whose overall pace and defensive issues would hold him back from actually being one of the top defensemen in the NHL. He was a consistent 40-point guy in Buffalo, but he was a -20, -40 in these years. It was not great. And then towards the end of his Buffalo days, he started to produce fewer and fewer points. He had 20 points in 74 games played last year with the Flyers, which is actually pretty alright. But this season, he's only got 4 points in 30 games played, on pace for about 8 total points. A very big decline from the 40-point marker he had accomplished a few years ago. Now, you could say all you want about how Ristolainen has indeed improved under John Tortorella. There's a good profile here of a guy who has been useful, but as we had talked about the other day, because there is now Jamie Drysdale in Philadelphia, there could be some room to move away from some of the other right-handed defensemen that are on this team, and that includes Ristolainen. Now, if you talk about the money, $3.5 million a year till the end of 2027, honestly, that's kind of a lot. And for the Vancouver Canucks that are already kind of cap-strapped, it's going to be interesting to see if this is the direction they decide to go, especially if rumors are saying that they're already involved in talking about Ristolainen in the first place. But we do have ourselves some extra updates that I wanted to go over that maybe kind of, I don't know, contradict the Ristolainen idea. And it comes to us in the form of a Donnie and Dolly video from earlier today on the show. Now, this is a segment that opens up by talking about Phil Kessel, and Dollywall goes out there and reports that the Canucks are indeed poking around on Phil. He doesn't go out there and directly confirm it, but he does say the Canucks are keeping in touch. He says that Phil Kessel likes Rick Tocchet, there is a good connection there, and Dollywall even brings up the same quote that we had from Tocchet in the video a few days ago, wherein Tocchet said in Toronto that, hey, Phil Kessel is still a good player, he can still play, he is a very useful player to have in the locker room, etc., etc. So, when it comes to Phil the Thrill, Dollywall proposes the question as to whether or not the Canucks could do it, but he does say they are poking around. There is mutual interest here, as we had reported a few weeks ago. And for Phil Kessel, at 36 years old, this may not even be a guy who comes in here and becomes a top 6 forward like he was in Toronto or in Pittsburgh all those years ago. He's probably just going to be brought on for depth if he does sign in Vancouver. And this is the kind of guy who, if you talk about his usefulness, he had 36 points in 82 games played with Vegas last season, yes, and only 4 games in the playoffs, but his presence in the locker room, his leadership, his overall vibe, it made the Vegas Golden Knights better because he allowed this team to mesh. That's the kind of guy that Phil Kessel is nowadays, less of the 90-point player he was 6 years ago, and more of a personality lifting up kind of guy. Plus, the fact that he does like Rick Tocchet's systems. He's played for Tocchet as an assistant coach in Pittsburgh. He's played for Tocchet as a head coach in Arizona. There is a good connection here with Phil Kessel and a lot of the Vancouver staff. However, Dalibor also goes out there and talks about Kessel in the same video and asks the question about conditioning. He brings up the point that one of the reasons that the Vancouver Canucks have been so good this season is because Rick Tocchet has enforced strict conditioning over the offseason. He got these guys into shape, they came in October, and they started eating worlds. Phil Kessel hasn't played ever since the playoffs in 2023. It's been almost a calendar year. So, where exactly is Kessel's conditioning? How far is he going to be able to go on the ice? How much are his lungs and his legs going to be able to keep up? That's a question you have to ask yourself. And finally, when it comes to the last part of this entire video, it's mentioned at the end here. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to listen to the video yourself. But Rick Dalibor does say that when it comes to the Calgary Flames and Chris Tanev, that the Flames are expecting to get themselves maybe a first-round pick in some sort of a deal. Dalibor says on this video that the Vancouver Canucks may not be too willing to depart with a first-round pick anymore. They've already made their trades. They traded for Lindholm. They traded for Zadorov. The Vancouver Canucks may not be in a position to go out there and spend even more draft capital for top-round picks in the next few years. And so Dalibor is essentially implying here, at least this is how I interpret it, that because the Calgary Flames and Chris Tanev may be in the realm of asking for a first and demanding a first, they expect a first, because Vancouver, they don't have their first anymore, it's sent over to Calgary, and they don't want to touch this 2025 or 2026 first, then maybe the Canucks' chances for getting a Chris Tanev are starting to become a little bit lower. And by proxy, if you talk about this Rasmus Ristolainen thing, because the labeled price may be a first-round pick in order to retain salary on Ristolainen and send him over to a new team, maybe the Vancouver Canucks won't have themselves too much of a say in this sale as well. Now, it is interesting because Dalibor does conclude at the end of this video that because the Canucks may not have too much bargaining power at their hands, because they may not want to go out there and flex those picks or a top prospect or whatever, maybe the only acquisitions they make towards the trade deadline are in the minor capacity. Maybe it is a smaller depth guy like a Phil Kessel that they get, or maybe some extra players in the bottom of the lineup they could trade for, who really knows. But at the end of the day, this is kind of the update that we have gotten, that according to Anthony DeMarco, the Canucks are in on Ristolainen alongside of the Toronto Maple Leafs. You've got some extra comments on Phil Kessel, and we're also talking about Chris Tanev and the trade update around him. Apparently the Vancouver Canucks may not want to touch another first-round pick. So we'll see where exactly the Canucks go from here on out till the end of the trade deadline period. But for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Rasmus Ristolainen, Chris Tanev, and Phil Kessel. All right-handed guys, all players who are probably available for different levels of value, but whose situations are very unique and separate everything else from the other two guys. Ristolainen's going to have salary retained if he gets traded. Phil Kessel is probably going to sign on for a short-term, very minimal dollar amount contract, and Chris Tanev may be available for a pretty steep price compared to what the Vancouver Canucks may want to give up. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Tanev, Ristolainen, and Kessel. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.